Okay, so now let's start with a new chapter, right? Actually, it's more than a new chapter. This is a new module, right? So let me quickly summarize what we have learned. Okay, so we have learned two modules. Module number one is about microeconomics. We review micro principles. And then in the second module, we learned essentially I will use measurement. Okay, and how we measure the economy. So we learn how to measure in GDP. We learn how to measure in prices, and we learn how to measure in labor market. Right? Those are the three fundamental things we need to understand in terms of measuring the economy, right? So in some sense, this is similar to in the doctor when you visit the doctor office, right? So the first things the nurse is going to do is take some vitals to you, like including your temperature, your blood pressure, or maybe your height. But then, so this GDP price and the labor market, they are so important, so crucial. It's similar to a doctor take a measure of your temperature, of your blood pressure, so on and so forth. Right? So that's what we have learned in the second module. Now we enter a third module. Right? In the third module, what we are going to do, we want to make sense of those numbers. The big question we're going to ask is, what determines the GDP level we observe? What determines the price level we see? What determines the labor market? Okay, like say, for example, unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate. We want to understand what determines those aggregate variables, or what determines what we observe. So that's what we are going to achieve in the third module. And then, so once we're done with the third module, we are going to move to the fourth module. So that's after this one. So we are going to look at policies. So in a sense, we're trying to understand what government policy can do or should do to dealing with some fluctuation or to dealing with some problem in our aggregate economy. Right. Now let's just zoom into module 3, so how we are going to proceed. Okay. So the way we start is, so we start from GDP, so that's a key equation, GDP equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. Right? So that is we learned in second module. We learn how to measure in GDP, and this is we call expenditure approach. Right? And we are going to focus on this expenditure approach, and we are going to look at this equation to understand what it determines GDP. But interesting, the way we do that is, so let me rewrite this equation, and then hopefully you understand what's going on. So I'm going to write y standard for GDP equal to C. C is going to have the function of y plus I as a function of y. And for now, so we ignore G and NX. So we start with this equation. Okay. From the simple algebra, you're going to see, so you have one equation and you have one unknown. What is unknown? Unknown is y. But essentially, once we understand this equation, you're going to see, so we have our tricks to determine y, right? And so let me copy the equation here. Y equal to C of y plus I of y. Okay, so this equation says a lot regarding to what we are going to learn in this module. So this equation first tells us, so the GDP is going to be determined by consumption and investment. But yes, we have G, we have NX, but for now, let's just say they are exogenous or they are not exist. Just remind yourself how we discuss the GDP. So we start with a simple flow chart diagram without government and without rest of the world. If that's the case, then y equal to c plus I. This is number one. And then, so in this chapter, I'm going to explain to you c is going to depending on y, and I is going to depending on y. Okay? And then so you're going to see, okay, so now you have one equation, one unknown, so that's going to help us to understand what determines y. So that's the first thing we are going to achieve. All right? Okay, so this is just a big picture of how we are going to proceed for this module. Now let's see, so what we are going to do in this chapter. Right? So in this chapter, so again, so let's recopy the equation. So we are going to focus on c as a function of y, and then so we are going to study y, I as a function of y. So that's what we are going to focus on, right? And then so throughout this chapter, so I'm going to explain to you what is multiplier, what is aggregate consumption function. By the way, so this aggregate consumption function essentially refers to this one, right? And then so we are going to see what can affect your consumer spending. And then lastly, so we are going to look at investment spending. So that's essentially, it goes to here. All right, so that's the roadmap. Now, let's start with multiplier. So once we understand this multiplier, we are going to understand what determines C, or how your consumption is going to affect you by your income, right? So by the way, so remember, so we say GDP, there are three approaches, right? So GDP, so you can look at income approach, you can look at expenditure approach, or you can look at product approach, right? So income, expenditure, they are equivalent. There's also equivalent to product. So then so when we say GDP, so you can think about is your income. Or when we say GDP, you can also think about this is your expenditure. Right. Now let's see, so how consumption is going to vary with income. Right? But eventually, so we are going to see so GDP through the lens of expenditure. Right. Okay. So first thing is multiplier. Okay. So what is multiplier? So multiplier is an important concept in macroeconomics to understand the chain reaction happens when the households and the firms interact each other in the goods and the service market, right? So basically, so this multiplier is going to help us understand the following questions. Okay? So if we have some extra income and we spend some of the extra income, okay, and it's an so in aggregate level, or look at the total economy, to what extent this extra income generates the aggregate spending change. Right? So here, there's an example. So if construction spending rises by 100 billion, how much does this affect the economy? And think about the current pandemic. Right? So we can have another examples. If the Congress decide to send everyone another check, right? So let's say, for example, this check becomes 1,000 per household, okay? And it goes to every single household. The total spending could be 1 trillion. Okay? Now the question is, to what extent this 1 trillion spending or $1 trillion of checks sent by the government will affect the aggregate economy. So that's another example, or more relevant example. Right? But to answer that question, we must rely on multiplier. All right, So now let's see how that works. Okay. First of all, multiplier. Okay. So in order to understand multiplier, we need to understand an intermediate concept, which is called marginal propensity to consumer, or stands for MPC. So this MPC measures your propensity to consume if you have 1 unit increase in, 1 unit increase in disposable income. Okay, just give you an example. If consumer income, disposable income goes up by $10, consumer spending goes by $6, and then the MPC is going to be 6 divided by 10, equal to 0.6. That just tells us if the consumer has additional $1, and this consumer is going to spend 60 cents out of this $1. Right? Here I want to emphasize disposable income is your income net of tax plus transfer. So this is disposable income, the income you are ready to spend. Right? So this marginal propensity to consumer measures the consumer's marginal incentive to spend when they have 1 unit of additional disposable income. Right? So this is MPC. Just keep in mind, any dollars you receive, you either spend or you consume, right? So if you have $1, so this dollar either you consume or you save. That immediately means whatever not consumed goes to saving. And then this also immediately means there's an interesting relationship between MPC and MPS. But what is MPS? This is comparable to MPC. It's a marginal propensity to save. Given $1 must divide between consume and save, so immediately we are going to have this equation. Or, so I can write 1 equal to MPS plus MPC. Why is that? It's because, let me write here. So you have $1, right? So you either consume, then so you change your consumption, or you change your saving, right? So now if we divide both sides by this same $1, which is your change in your income, right? And then so immediately see, so the left-hand side is 1, and this delta C divided by 1, actually this is your change in your disposable income. That's called delta Y, okay? And 1, this also is change your income, delta Y. So immediately we are going to get this equation. But the logic behind this equation comes from the fact any penny we earn, you either save or you consume. Right? So that's why the MPC and MPS, they add up equal to 1 here. Right. Now, given this MPC, we are ready to answer the questions we raised earlier. Just imagine if everybody receive a check from the government, right? But again, so why the government want to send us a check? It's because the government want to help the economy. But you may wonder, so why a check to everybody is going to help the economy? The short answer is, so this check from the government will help us to pay for the bill, will give us incentive to demand goods and service, will increase or will lift up the demand, right? So the long answer will wait for the next module when we talk about the government policy. But for now, so our focus is if the government sent everybody $1,000 of a check, how would that affect the aggregate economy? Okay, okay, now let's see, so what happens. Okay. So the starting point is, so for each dollar we receive, okay, let me write down here, each dollar we receive, okay, so we may spend some and we may save some, but toward the end, what would be the total impact on the aggregate demand? Okay, so now let's see. So let's just say the total initial spending is 100 billion. All right, so here's in this example is investment spending, but you can easily say, oh, the government decide to send everybody a check, right? And then so with the check, so the aggregate spending is 100 billion immediately, right? But certainly this 100 billion is out of, I don't know, so depending on MPC, because you receive a larger amount than this 100 billion. You just effectively spend 100 billion from what you received. Okay, so but this is initial 100 billion. But the story doesn't stop here. Why is that? Just imagine if, let's just use myself as example. If I receive 1,000 from the government, and then so I'm going to spend. How much I'm going to spend? So that's coming from the previous chapter, previous slides. We just say there's an MPC, meaning for each $1 additional income I receive, I will spend some and save some. How much I'm going to spend is going to be 1,000 times MPC. So that's how much I'm going to spend, right? So for example, so I spend this amount to buy some furniture. Okay, so I'm going to buy a standing desk so that I can become more productive in giving lecture to my students. Okay, and so what that means? That means, let's just put some number. Okay, so the MPC, say for example, 0.6. What that means? Means, so I'm going to spend $600. But this $600 is going to become somebody else's income. And in this case, so this $600, because I spent in furniture, let's say I spent this money or I purchased this furniture in the furniture mart, Nebraska Furniture Mart. So that just means, so Nebraska Furniture Mart, so they are going to receive additional $600. That's additional income. So this income goes to their workers. The income goes to their owners, right? That just means either their workers or their owners, they have additional $600 in their pocket. And so where this $600 coming from is because I received $1,000 of check from the government. I decide to spend $600. So now this $600 goes to Nebraska Furniture Mart, right? And then so whoever received this $600, they are going to spend. Let's just say they have 7 MPC, and then how much they're going to spend? They're going to spend 360. Where they're going to go? Let's say so they go to a restaurant, right? So they go to I don't know what is your favorite restaurant. Let's say they go to Charleston, right? They have a celebration because they have some new orders, right? $360 they spend. Just keep in mind this $360 spending coming from the $600 of income Nebraska Furniture Mart. So they received from me. Okay, so they just spent 60% of this $600. Now this $360 becomes somebody else's income. Whose income is in this case? Charleston. Okay, and so the waiters or the owners or whoever make the meals, they are going to receive $360 of additional income. What they are going to do, they're doing the same things. They're going to spend, right? So how much they're going to spend? They're going to spend $360 times 0.6, okay, which is around $180. Okay, so you can see this process is going to keep going. Now let's see what is the net impact, or what is the total impact of this initial $1,000 of check from the government. We add them together, right? So this is going to be 600 here. Okay, I spend in Nebraska Furniture Mart, plus $360 here. Nebraska Furniture Mart's employee is going to spend in Charleston $360, and then plus $180 here. So that is Nebraska Furniture. Sorry, this is Charleston's employees. They're going to spend fraction of their income received from Nebraska Furniture Mart's employee to buy something else. But actually, this process is going to keep moving, right? So if we add them together, so this obviously, so this is going to be bigger than the original 600, right? And why I compare with this 600? Because this 600 is the initial spending. Okay, so everybody receive a check, including myself. I'm going to spend 600. And here, so the point is in the aggregate or in the macro economy, the clock doesn't stop there. Okay, so once I start to spend, and you can see there's a chain rule happen in the economy. Right. To summarize, here, so the total spending is going to be 1 plus MPC plus MPC squared plus MPC third, so on and so forth, times the original spending, right? And so that's going to give us the total impact of initial spending. So here, so 1 over 1 minus MPC. Right? So this is 1 over 1 minus MPC actually equal to the items inside this bracket. 1, that's initial spending, plus MPC squared plus MPC cube, so on and so forth. Right. Okay. So now let's look at these practice questions. Okay. Presumably, so I want you to discuss with the partner. Now let's see, so what is this question asking? Suppose that the MPS in the economy is equal to 0.2. And suppose the level of investment spending increased by $200 this year. Now this question asks you to trace out the total increase in real GDP, showing the increase in consumer spending for at least the second, third, and fourth round of spending, and the overall increase in real GDP. Okay. So how we are going to proceed? So this is the initial increase in spending, right? So this say just presume, so this $200 was invested in by a new monitor, right? This is considered as investment. And what that means, or so what's going to be the next step, or what is going to be the second round of spending? So this is the first round, right? $200, this is the first round. Okay. What is going to be the second round? The second round comes from the fact whoever received $200, is going to spend a fraction, MPC. And here the MPC equal to 1 minus MPS equal to 0.8. Meaning second round, whoever received this $200 is going to spend 200 times 0.8. That's going to be $180. Okay, so you may say, oh, so this guy is going to spend $180 to buy, say for example, a chair, right? So now this $180 goes to somebody else pocket, and then somebody else, actually this is going to be the third person in the economy, or third round of spending in the economy. So now this third round of spending is going to equal to 180 times 0.8, right? Because the third person in the row received $180 from second person, and this person is going to spend a fraction. The fraction that he's going to spend, or she's going to spend, equal to the MPC. Now we have fourth round. In the fourth round, the person who is going to receive this amount, this goes to the first person, is going to spend a fraction. Now let's go to 180 times 0.8 times 0.8. Right? To complete the story, so the initial round, we spent 200 into purchasing a new monitor. In the second round, so with $180, we go to buy a new chair. Now in the third round, so whoever sold the chair is going to spend this amount. Let's say, for example, to buy a Xbox console, right? And then in the last round, so whoever sold this Xbox console is going to spend this amount. Let's say for example, so they're going to have a big meal. And actually, so you can keep tracing out what happens. Whoever provides this meal is going to spend a fraction of this amount. Say for example, to watch a movie, so on and so forth. Right? And then so the total impact on the economy is going to be 1 over 1 minus 0.8. That's the multiplier times 200. So that's the total impact on our economy. When we initiate at $200 of investment spending, right? So you can see, so this is like a clock. It just keeps ticking, right? It doesn't stop at the initial spending. It just keep ticking around, right? And so the reason why is because we have this marginal propensity to consume. For each dollar people receive, they're going to spend. And this process is going to keep moving. Right? Actually, so this slide just show you the whole process, how we reach the conclusion I just explained. Right? So if you get them also here, so the initial spending 200, second round 160, third round, so this is 160 times, so this is equal to 160 times MPC 120. Fourth round, so now this 120 goes to inside this bracket times MPC equal to 102. And we keep going, so this is just moving infinitely. And so the total summation is going to equal to this amount. Right. Now we are ready to look at this multiplier. Right. So actually the multiplier essentially is this item or this term. And what is this term? This term is what we just discussed. The total impact on aggregate spending when we have an initial $1 increase in spending, right? It's depending on marginal propensity to consume, right? And here we define AAS as autonomous change in aggregate spending. Actually, that's just initial increase in spending. If there's an initial change in autonomous aggregate spending, and then so the total impact on real GDP. So here, actually, we look at GDP through the lens of spending. Just remind yourself, there are three ways to look at GDP, right? And then so the total impact on real GDP is going to equal to these changes in autonomous aggregate spending, multiply this multiplier. And then naturally, so the multiplier, either you can say equal to a function of MPC, or equal to the ratio between changes in total spending versus changes in autonomous aggregate spending. Right? So this is a multiplier. To further understand the multiplier, just think about some extreme case. If MPC equal to close to 1, and then so you can see these numbers goes to infinity. How we understand that? It just means, so if I receive $1 from the government, and my MPC is almost close to 1, and what happens? Or what that means? That means I pretty much spend any penny I received, right? And then so this every penny I spend goes to somebody else's income, and then in the second round, so the whoever received this money has the same MPC and has the same incentive to spend pretty much any penny he or she received. Now we can keep going, so you can see, so the total impact on the real GDP or the spending is going to be close to 1 plus 1 plus 1, so on and so forth, right? So this is a perpetual impact on the total spending. So that's why when MPC is close to 1, this goes to infinity. On the other hand, if MPC close to 0, and then so the multiplier is going to be 1. Why is that? It's because once we initiate the spending, and then we stop there. Right, okay. Now let's look at these practice questions. Holding everything else constant in the economy, the larger the NP is. Okay. So what's the impact on multiplier? So to understand this one, so we need to write this 1 over 1 MPC. So that's the multiplier. The larger the MP is, meaning the smaller the MPC. But the smaller the MPC, but it means larger this one. If the denominator gets larger, and then so the total term getting smaller, right? So the answer is A, right? Okay, so as usual, let's take 5 minutes break. And once we coming back from break, we are continue our discussion regarding to multiplier.